Imagine you wake up one morning and decide that everything you believe might be wrong. Not just some things, everything. Your memories, your perceptions, your education, everything you've been told about the world, and you refuse to accept anything at all, unless you can prove it is absolutely, indubitably certain. That is what René Descartes did, and in doing so, he didn't just write one of the most important philosophical texts in history, he launched the modern era of Western philosophy. Descartes was born in 1596 in La Haye, France, a small town that now bears his name. He was a brilliant student, educated by Jesuits, and mastered mathematics early, so early that his mathematical achievements alone would have secured his legacy. He invented analytic geometry, the coordinate system that allowed algebra and geometry to speak to each other. Every time you draw a graph, every time you use x and y coordinates, you're working in a framework Descartes invented. But Descartes was dissatisfied. Despite his mathematical brilliance, he looked at the world of philosophy and saw chaos, endless disagreements, arguments that went nowhere, positions that changed depending on who was arguing. And he thought, we need to start over. We need to find a foundation, one absolutely certain truth, from which everything else can be rebuilt on solid ground. So in 1641, he published the Meditations on First Philosophy, 6 dense, extraordinary meditations that have been argued over ever since. And the method he uses is radical, methodological doubt. He will doubt everything he can possibly doubt and see what's left standing. Round 1 of doubt, the senses. Descartes observes that his senses have deceived him before. He's mistaken a sound for something else. He's seen optical illusions. If the senses can deceive even sometimes, he can't fully trust them as a foundation. He can doubt sensory experience. Round 2 of doubt, the dream argument. When you're dreaming, you believe you're awake. The experience of dreaming can be exactly as vivid as the experience of being awake. So how do you know right now that you're not dreaming? You don't. You could be. So the physical world around you, the world you perceive, might be a dream. Doubt it. Round 3 of doubting, and this is the most dramatic, the evil demon. Suppose Descartes says, there is an all-powerful, supremely deceptive demon who is constantly feeding you false experiences. Everything you see, everything you calculate, everything you believe, the demon is making it seem true when it's false. Could you rule this out? Can you prove with certainty that no such demon exists? No, you can't. At this point, it seems like everything is in doubt. External reality, gone. Mathematics, gone. Everything. But then, something stops. Something refuses to be doubted. And here's the pivot point of the entire meditations. Even if the demon is deceiving me, there must be a me to be deceived. Even if everything I think is false, there must be a me doing the thinking. Thought implies a thinker. Even the act of doubting is a form of thinking. And so, in the very moment of radical doubt, Descartes finds the one thing he cannot doubt, his own existence as a thinking thing. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This is perhaps the most famous sentence in the history of philosophy. It is the bedrock, the first certain truth. And from this foothold, Descartes attempts to rebuild all of human knowledge. But what exactly has he established? That I exist as a thinking thing, a mind, a self-aware consciousness, not a body. He can't yet be sure his body exists, just a mind. This is the birth of what philosophers call Cartesian dualism, the distinction between mind and body as two fundamentally different substances. The mind is a thinking thing. It has no extension in space, no physical properties. The body is an extended thing. It occupies space, it follows mechanical laws, it can be measured and quantified. They are radically different. This distinction had enormous influence. On the one hand, it elevated the status of the mind, of consciousness, of the inner life. On the other hand, it created a problem that philosophy has been wrestling with ever since, the mind-body problem. If mind and body are so completely different, how do they interact? How does my decision to raise my arm actually cause my arm to rise? Descartes, rather unsatisfactorily, suggested they interact through the pineal gland. Few were convinced. The problem remains one of the central puzzles of philosophy today. From the Cogito, Descartes proceeds to argue for God's existence, using a version of the ontological argument, and then, with God as guarantor of his faculties, to argue that the external world, perceived clearly and distinctly, is real. The argument is controversial, and many philosophers have found it circular, using God to validate reason while using reason to prove God. This has been called the Cartesian circle and debated ever since. But what matters most about Descartes is not whether his specific arguments succeed. What matters is the revolution in method. He establishes the individual thinking mind as the starting point of philosophy. Not tradition, not revelation, not authority, but reason applied rigorously, beginning with what you can know with absolute certainty. This is the spirit of the Enlightenment. This is the spirit of modernity. And his skeptical method, his willingness to doubt everything in pursuit of something certain, is not just a historical curiosity. It is a practical tool. How often do we hold beliefs simply because we've always held them, because our culture tells us to, because they're comfortable? The Cartesian method invites us, demands of us, to question, to examine, to ask, how do I actually know this? Descartes spent his later years in the Netherlands, working quietly, corresponding with scientists and philosophers across Europe. In 1649, he was invited to Stockholm by Queen Christina of Sweden, who wanted him to teach her philosophy. The Swedish winter was brutal for a man used to the milder climate of France and Holland. He contracted pneumonia and died in February 1650. He was 53 years old. His influence is incalculable. John Locke, Leibniz, Spinoza, Hume, Kant, all are responding in one way or another to Descartes. He set the agenda for modern philosophy. The questions he raised about the nature of the self, the reliability of the senses, the relationship between mind and body are still our questions. Next time on PhiloByts, we leave behind the certainty of Descartes and enter the disciplined architecture of Immanuel Kant, a philosopher who asked not what the world is, but how we are able to know it at all, a thinker who placed limits on reason in order to reveal its true power, and who argued that freedom begins not when we follow our desires, but when we obey laws we give to ourselves. Until then, question what you take for granted. Ask not only what you know, but how you know it.